Hello YouTube and welcome back to another one of my videos. Today we're back in GTA 5 for another history lesson. Now the first history lesson did really well with over 200 views, but the second one hasn't done that well at all. So if you enjoy these history lessons, check out both episodes if you want, but if you've already seen the first, there is a second one up. So if you want to see that, I'll link it in the description. But today we're focusing on the third lesson, which is about aircraft. Now, quite a weird one today because we're not going to focus on a lot of Russian vehicles in this category. We're not going to focus on the massive bomber that they've got in the game because of the situation at the moment in Eastern Europe. So we're going to move on from that subject and we're going to focus on a German, a British and an American plane or helicopter, if you want. And we're going to start off with the American helicopter, which is this. So this is the Avenger in the game. It's got multiple turrets you can add on to it. It's a VTOL, which means vertical takeoff and landing aircraft or helicopter. And it's quite a strange aircraft because in the game it's one of the services that you call in because of how big it is. And you need a facility to store it. It is based off a real life one, as all the vehicles in this game. It is based off the V22 Osprey. Now, after the failed operation in the Iraq hostage crisis, Operation Eagle Claw, the Americans wanted a helicopter that could do multiple roles, like carry troops in and out of the field while travelling at extremely high speeds, such as a plane. It was first produced back in 1988. It's still used today. 400 have been built as of 2020. So its first flight was on the 19th of March 1989. Sorry. It had many manufacturers behind it, including Bell Helicopter, Boeing Defense, and Space and Security. On the real life one, however, there aren't really many turrets. On this in-game, you have one on the rear, one at the front, and one on the top, I believe. I don't usually use this vehicle a lot, but in real life, it doesn't really have many turrets. What I can tell, there isn't a turret on the back. However, it does have a cargo ramp for transporting troops. So basically, this is a helicopter version of an AC-130, if you'd like. Because there were multiple different variants and things like that. And the Americans did alright. The only issue is that they claim that this is their design, their everything. Not true at all. This vehicle was actually based off a German vehicle, as all American vehicles nowadays. The M1 Abrams was based off the Leopard 2. This one, the V22 Osprey, it's based off of the Fokker I can't say that. FA223 Drache. Yeah. All I know is that it was made by the Fokker, I can't say it, the FA German aircraft manufacturer known as Fokker, which made the Fokker Wolf and so on. The FA223 was basically the German version of this, but it was made all the way back in 1941. Used by the Luftwaffe, the Czechoslovakia Air Force, and the French Air Force during the German occupation. Only 20 were built, and it basically has a non-existent service life, but it's basically a German version of this. It had a top speed of about 109, the cruising speed was 109 miles per hour, and the top speed was 113. Which for World War II was pretty decent for a helicopter, and it was basically the first helicopter as well, since helicopters didn't really come into full force until the Cold War. But yeah, that's the American V22. Pretty interesting vehicle, design stolen by the Germans, and it still serves to this day as a troop carrier aircraft instead of an attack aircraft as intended in the game. So with that, we'll move on to our next vehicle. Right, so next up we have the P45 Nakota in GTA 5. Now, when you get this vehicle, you can have multiple liveries applied to it. This one being the Supermarine Spitfire, and the other being the P41 Mustang, which many believe that is the representation of this vehicle. However, it's a bit of a mixture of both. Because during World War II, many fighter aircraft were extremely similar. Usually had one propeller at the front, middle compartment, machine guns on the wings, and yeah, just a regular fighter sort of design. And the main ones being the Spitfire, the Mustang, the Germans had the Messerschmitt Bf-109, and the Russians had the Yak. Now, I'm basically going to focus on the Spitfire, since I have A, the livery, and B, already done an American plane in this video. So, the Supermarine Spitfire, yes, it was probably one of the most famous aircraft of World War II. A very interesting aircraft due to its development and many variations. It was basically made right at the start, because before World War II we had the Hurricane, but we soon realised once it entered combat it wasn't as effective as we thought it would be, so we kept it in combat for a while because it was the only thing we really had. And then we upgraded it to the Spitfire. Well, we made the Spitfire. We didn't upgrade the Hurricane. The Hurricane is a completely different aircraft. We've got the Spitfire. Very strange aircraft because it had multiple different variants. Now, a variation or a variant of a vehicle is basically the same vehicle with different attachments onto it. Like a gun, for instance. Say you have... not really the best with guns, but say you had a gun with a suppressor or a different scope. This is basically what variants are on vehicles. So for example, with the German Panzer IV, they first started with short-barreled 75mm guns, then they upgraded to long-barreled 75mm guns, then they added side armor, different transmissions and engines. All of them were different variants, and basically they went through the alphabet with their tanks. But with aircraft we just made them Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3 and so on. So this is a very strange variant, because the Spitfire had usually 8 machine guns in total. This one only has 6. But it's a very close representation of the 8 machine gun Spitfire, because what happened during World War II is that we had very limited ammunition, and the Spitfire only had about 12 seconds of ammunition, so you had to fire them in bursts of about 1 to 2 seconds to make every shot count. And once you ran out of ammunition, there was nothing else you could do, and you had to try and get home without getting shot down yourself. I think only like 2% of bullets fired were actually landed on target, but still a very effective aircraft. It was used. Many other variations included bombs, spotter aircraft and so on. A very effective plane, and we actually used them after World War II, and it was one of the last propellered fighter planes out there before jet aircraft soon took off. Ching, if you get the joke. Yeah, it had one of the most nicest sounding engines, in many people's opinion, in an aircraft, a Rolls-Royce engine inside an aircraft. And that's how many people could tell it was a Spitfire, because it made a certain noise. But that's the same with every aircraft pretty much. The Germans had their own noise, especially the Stuka dive bombers with their sirens. The Americans had howling aircraft. I've forgotten what they're called. I'm not the best with American vehicles. The P-51 Mustang was pretty much useless until the British had their hands on it and replaced the engine with a Rolls-Royce, the same we used in the Spitfire, so that way it could travel longer distances and at faster speeds. And that's how the P-51 Mustang was good. And everyone's like, oh wow, America made the best plane in the world. It wasn't, it was a goddamn Spitfire plane, goddammit! That's the Spitfire in a nutshell. In the game, basically the same characteristics in World War II, good maneuverability, speed, and everything. The only thing a bit strange is when you take off. It's a very tough plane to take off, because as you can see, it does that, and you do not want it to go forward into the ground, because then, well, you lose the propeller. But yeah, pretty good. It's got good takeoff speed like it did in World War II. They had to use these during the Battle of Britain because of the German bombers and so on. These were their main defense. It was an easy aircraft to produce as well, so it was easy to produce, and it could basically I had a bit of a panic attack there. It was easy to produce, easy to take off, easy to fire at enemy aircraft, easy to learn. It was just one of the best aircraft of World War II, and there's nothing you can do to change anyone's mind about it. And it's known as the best fighter of World War II, but I believe it's a bit of a mix between this and the Bf-109E. In my opinion, are the best aircraft of World War II, because they both had a legendary rivalry. Both had good maneuverability. They both had basically the same exact strong points. It's just that Germany was this massive empire while it took over Europe, and Britain was all alone, and they managed to produce something decent enough to hold the Germans back by themselves. So that is the story of the Spitfire. Now we'll go on to the very last vehicle as soon as I get back to the hangar. We'll go back to the last vehicle in this episode, which is a German plane. Now, the German plane is very interesting. It's truth. I don't want to crash into one of my favourite tanks of all time, the LF22. Anyway, we shall now move on to the German aircraft. Okay, so the last vehicle we have today is this, the LF22 Starling, and this is, in many people's opinion, one of the strangest vehicles in GTA 5. If you've ever bought this thing, basically its regular speed is extraordinarily slow, and the only way to really take off is by using a jet engine on the back, and I shall show this to you later on when I test fly the vehicle. But this is based off of a German World War II vehicle, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. And in World War II, the Me-163 Comet was one of the most interesting aircraft in the entire war, mostly because of its service life and its development, and just the fact that it was one of the first ever rocket-propelled aircraft of all time, and the first mass-produced rocket-propelled aircraft of all time. Many people believe it's a British aircraft, but it's not. So, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, it was an interceptor aircraft. It was meant to shoot down bomber planes. First flight was the 1st of September 1941, and it was introduced in 1944. Yeah, it had 3 years for it to be perfected. The leader saw this and was like, no, we need more propeller aircraft, and spent a lot of time developing things like the Heinkel, which didn't really work out in the end. And then he was shown it the second time, and it flew and things like that, and there was a spark in his eyes, and he was like, "Yeah, let's go with this." So what happened was they built it. It did go into production. About 370 were made. It's a rough number because not much is really known about this aircraft. And yeah, like I said earlier, it was one of the first ever, or the first ever, mass-produced jet aircraft. However, it wasn't the most practical. This aircraft is known as one of Germany's Wunderwaffes, or super weapons. Many other weapons included the Maus, the V1 and V2 rockets, and other jet aircraft that were introduced later in the war by the Germans. And basically, if they didn't produce these Wunderwaffes, they would have a lot more of what they already had, such as the Tiger 1. If they didn't produce the Tiger 1, they would have had thousands of more Panzer 4s and Stugs and things like that. And the V2, if they didn't produce the V2 rocket, they would have roughly 2,000 more Messerschmitt Bf-109s, which is not this. By the way, this is the Comet, not the Emil. Anyway, as you can see, this is full thrust by pressing the right trigger. Very slow. And as you can already tell, the jet on the back of this thing is absolutely tiny. That's because once you do, it was actually in World War II launched off a launching pad, which put it straight up into the air, and then some sort of fluid was actually added to the jet, which made it go like that. No real, you can't lift up the landing gear on this aircraft, but that's alright. Yeah, so you're flying around and you realise, wow, this thing is actually extremely quick now. But in Germany of World War II, this rocket could only last 6 minutes in the air. 6! And I'm already out in the game. And then afterwards you're like, oh god, I've got no fuel left, what do I do? You have to glide back to base. And in real life, this thing didn't actually have any landing gear either. So what it would have to do is try to brake as much as possible with the flaps, and then just scrape along the floor. And that's how you landed this thing in real life. Not practical whatsoever. And it was extremely costly in terms of materials, and it basically had only one use, and it was to shoot down bombers. And if you want to get back to the hangar in this game, you can either wait it out like this, or that, which could pretty much break the entire plane if you're not careful, especially if you own the military base. A very non-practical aircraft, and you're probably like, if it only lasted 6 minutes in the air, how did it actually attack enemy bombers? Well, it was meant to be launched from extremely small runways that were right at the front lines that hopefully the Americans won't notice, and they didn't really, because America. So eventually this thing did go into production, it was used. Not much is really known about this or how many planes it shot down, but really it's not really effective, and unlike the game, it doesn't have rockets or bombs in real life. But still a very interesting aircraft. Anyway, that's all the vehicles we have to show today. Next time we will look at the boats and see what other boats there are, including submarines. Anyway, like and subscribe if you enjoy these history lessons. Check out the other two in the description. And I shall see you next time. Bye bye.